Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor, the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Red Circle. Also, the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. Also, check us out on Off the Floor. That's our new Discord. You can find the link right here on the podcast feed. Also, on the YouTube channel descriptions and pinned to the top of the Five Reasons Twitter page. $2.99 per month. We've got almost 500 tip-off members now. Make sure you click on it, and then yes, you got to pay the $2.99 a month to see our 9 channels. We're actually adding a 10th channel with NBA draft prospects, so you can get you ready for the draft way in advance. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. I just ordered from here. If you're going to get this in for Valentine's Day, you better do it soon. ShopTubCulture.com. Again, that's ShopTubCulture.com. This is where you go to get a great gift, a great local business right here in South Florida. They make bath and body products that are all handmade using gentle natural ingredients with no animal testing. I would suggest the beer bath bombs. I did a little research on the site the past couple of days, so check it out. Use the promo code 5 FIVE. Get 10% off your order of $20 or more. Again, it's ShopTubCulture.com. Use the code FIVE. And now, today's episode. All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick, and follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick and at Five Reasons Sports. We got Alex Toledo. You can follow him at Tropical Blanket. Make sure you check out the last couple episodes that we did. Of course, a bunch of trade deadline related stuff, but also an episode on Terry Rozier and Tyler Hero, what that backcourt looks like now, what it might look like in the future, who needs to sacrifice, what the upside is. We got into all of it. So Brady and I did about 30 minutes on that. Make sure you check that out on the feed. But they're playing the Celtics on Sunday. It's getting lost a little bit because it's Super Bowl Sunday, but we felt it's worth a short preview episode because this is the one team Miami needs to get past. I mean, I think when you look at the Eastern Conference right now, talk about where they may finish, Milwaukee, Doc Rivers, that whole defense thing doesn't seem to be working. The Knicks, they've got some injuries right now, Anunoby and Randall, even though they're playing very well. Cleveland has gotten everybody back, and Donovan Mitchell is now an MVP candidate. So they're obviously some team that's going to have to be reckoned with. But Miami has a chance to pass Philly with what's happened there with Embiid and going to be out for several weeks. And I believe Miami should stay ahead or get ahead and stay ahead of Indiana with their current roster. So it's really about Boston, Alex. And we saw what happened the last time Boston came down here. It was humiliating, honestly. I mean, I haven't seen Miami play that poorly defensively in a long time in a game that mattered. Jimmy Butler is questionable for this game. We should say that. Dealing with some personal issues. He missed 2 days of practice. I had heard he was going to play. Then he got downgraded. So we'll see what happens on Sunday. But Alex, let's just start here. Why did Boston give Miami so many problems the last time?
I hate to say it because they're a really good team and they got cooking. And we know the flaws in the Heat's defense when you just talk about like their game plan and schematically, right? Like we know the ways that a team has beat them before. If they really kind of just are able to kind of knife their way through the first layer of defense, and once they get the Heat into early rotations and kind of scrambling, the open threes start coming. And I think when those things add up, it can get bad real quick. And a team like the Celtics, that's kind of been the best team in the NBA all season, and a team that now with the Porzingis addition and with their guys, like they can really play 5 out all the time. Well, not necessarily when Xavier Tillman is in the game because he's not necessarily a shooter, but that's besides the point. Like in that game, this new Celtics group has a way of stretching you out, I believe, in a way that others couldn't. Now, maybe like with the other teams, like you could take Robert Williams off the floor, and in that way that you can run 5 out, and that's kind of what they did. But I think they have a more dynamic group of guys trying to run that unit now. When you're involving Drew, when you're involving Porzingis, Derek White and his production, I think it's just a really good team, man. And they got through the layer of the Heat's defense, and they kept making them pay with the threes. And I think it's nothing fluky. Like hot shooting is hot shooting, but the hot shooting started because of defensive mistakes. And I think in that game specifically, there was a lot of switching going on. And I think I didn't like it. I didn't like it against that team specifically when you're starting Hero and Rozier. And if you're going to do that, right, you have to do it right. And I think like if you know they're going to be kind of having to switch a small guy, whether it's Rozier or Hero, onto somebody bigger more often than not because of what they're doing. That help has to be there. That second man has to be there on time and early. Like I thought there was so many points in that game that they just kept like they got into the teeth of the defense over and over and over and knew exactly where the holes were and what to pick at. And I think it's a little bit scary as a Heat fan because it's like, okay, do we match up with this team? And look, maybe it's optimistic and naive of me. I really do think they can compete with them again. Like I always say, if they hold down the fort defensively, because like you can't let that team get going from three. They will kill you, and like we've seen them do it before. They will live and they will die by the three. Except the unit they have now can do a little bit more than others that they've had in the past. But first things first, the Heat have to have everything right on defense, and it's easier said than done, right? It's not just about effort. Like when you have Rozier and Hero out there, you're gonna have to fight to help those guys out, and your rotations are gonna have to be on point since you're constantly sending help for both of those guys. So it's not gonna be easy, but I think if they can really start off well on that end, they have a chance.
I think when you look at the matchups here, Porzingis changes a lot, obviously, for them, and that's something they didn't have to deal with last year. But also Drew changes a lot, and I know that Jimmy, did some work against Drew in the playoffs last year, but he gives Boston a very different look defensively. They have a lot of length. Um, they really are not weak defensively in any spot. There's no one to exploit. It was pretty much only when you went to Boston's bench, and that's one of the reasons they went and got Xavier Tillman to get a better defender up front because they were thin up front. But they have plus defenders everywhere, and really, when this matchup comes down to me, a lot of times it just comes down to the mental stuff with Boston. Like, because I think Boston's roster is better. There's no way to argue otherwise at this point. I like the Heat roster better than I liked the roster last year, but I like the Boston roster a lot more than I liked the Boston roster last year. And so Miami's going to be at a disadvantage. And a lot of this comes down again to sort of the mental edge that I think Miami has against them in the playoffs and just getting to that series playing well and then hoping that again that edge that you have it starts to get in Boston's heads a little bit. And I think that's kind of the recipe I'm looking for this year with them. And it's got to be at a point, I think we've talked about this, where Miami faces them late enough in the playoffs, where they've gotten a little bit of a head of steam from winning a series or winning two series or something like that, and maybe seeing them again in the Eastern Conference Finals. And to do that, Miami's going to need to be in that sort of, 2, 3, 6, 7 bracket, as opposed to being in the one bracket, because it appears that that's where Boston's going to be. So honestly, although I think Miami may end up finishing fifth, you don't really want to finish fifth because I don't think you want to see Boston potentially, excuse me, potentially in the second round. Um, but before I go further on this, if they haven't engaged Jimmy Butler, which they've not had in either of the two games they've seen the Celtics this year, how much difference does that make in terms of? I feel like it matters more in this matchup than it matters in just about any other.
I get that. I get that. That line of thinking, and we've seen it so many times in the past in the playoffs when he's really shining and kind of the number one, even if we're not necessarily talking about him having to kind of carry the team and all that. Just but being number one regardless, I think really and setting the tone from the beginning of the game is valuable to the team. He is their leader. He is, I think, the guy that gets everybody going. When you talk about his personality, and then when you talk about on the court, I honestly I feel like that's been the biggest difference between this regular season Jimmy. Not, I mean, on the offensive side, because the defense we know that the differences have been there. Not as many deflections, all that stuff, but offensively, like we know that he's never been this offensive dynamite scorer for in the regular season for you. But the difference was, I feel like in the past he was a little bit more willing to be on ball and play make, and that there's been less of that this season, and more so as of recent since he's been kind of ramping up. But overall for the season, I think they need that aspect from him. Even if he's not giving you 30 points, he needs to be a threat out there and more and on ball more often than not if he's on the floor. Like it's the cutting is cool, but a lot of times, like during the regular season, he doesn't cut as much also, and sometimes cuts into space when others are already there. especially with Bam. I really can't stand when that happens, and I feel like it's just like almost like not lack of focus, but like those types of things wouldn't be happening in the playoffs. I think that he realizes like the margin for error is different, and we've seen that before. But yeah, like get Jimmy right and in the right role, and I think that it starts there, and it starts with the defense, and then on the offensive end, it starts with Jimmy. I think he has to be in the right space. It can't be Tyler trying to like do too much. It can't be Bam trying to do too much. Same thing for Terry. Um, but it absolutely starts with Jimmy.
We're going to talk a little bit about a guy that both teams may be competing for with a buyout a little bit later. I do want to mention a couple things. First thing, Tillman's not going to play on Sunday. He's been officially ruled out, so we won't see him. He's still getting over a knee injury that he suffered prior to the trade from Memphis. And again, I do think he's going to help their depth because I thought that Miami's major advantage here is depth. I look at a couple guys that I think could be keys in a Boston matchup. One guy I want to see get going is Jaquez. I feel like he's starting to round back into shape a little bit, got the rust off, came back to a team that was a little bit different than the one that he left. Obviously, Rozier is going to be a little bit more ball dominant than Lowry was, so it does change the dynamic somewhat. I know Tyler, we talked about that on the podcast, how Tyler's trying to figure out how to play off of Terry. But Hawkins feels like a guy to me who could be an X factor against Boston. We saw it last year with Caleb. Obviously, Caleb's on the scouting report with them. Caleb's mind may be freer now too. By the way, got past it. This is the first game after the trade deadline. Caleb was out there. We saw this affect Duncan and Tyler in previous years, and then both of them kind of take off, particularly Duncan when the All-Star break, when the trade deadline passed. I don't think that was as big an issue this year. It definitely was the past couple of years, but I do think that we may see Caleb come out energized. But Boston is well aware of him with what he did to them last year. Hawkins, to me, now needs to counter what other teams have done against him defensively. Like we talked about, he'll have a counter for everything. Now we need to start to see it because teams are starting to take away that little spin to the middle. They understand that when he's in transition, he's not passing, he's just going. There's certain tendencies that have been developed here over his first 40, 50 games. I also think that, he hit the wall a little bit. I mean, he was playing crazy amount of minutes for a rookie, and he was playing clutch minutes. He was playing the entire fourth quarter. He's playing high intensity, high leverage minutes. So I feel he needs a break. He's not going to get it over All-Star weekend, obviously, because he's going to be in Rising Stars and in the slam dunk contest. But I just look at him as a guy that Boston, I feel like maybe it's because Bill Simmons is so afraid of him. Maybe that's it. But I don't know. I feel like he's an X factor in this matchup. Like I feel like he's the kind of guy who could get going a little bit against what Boston will throw out there.
I could see it. I could see it too, and I could also see it the other way, because what made Caleb and how he responded so special was it was a matchup thing, and that doesn't take away from what he did. And but what I mean by matchup thing is just like the way that they guarded him, not necessarily like who was guarding him. And they might do the same thing with Jaquez, and I think I'm not 100% sure that he's going to respond to it great. Not because I don't, have faith in him or anything like that, but I think he might have to take some of these open threes, and him being so open, if that is what they do, I think will ultimately help him, because I think some of these missed threes, or when he kind of rushes some. I think you said that the other day at the game when we were there, and I think it's a good point, because like the form is okay, but I think his form kind of lends itself more to inside the arc, and I think you see that with like the midi looks very natural, and the NBA three, as everybody knows, is a little bit longer than the college three. So I think sometimes when he doesn't have enough time to really set his feet, a lot of times it looks short, in my opinion. And you saw it short in a couple of the free throws last game too. And so it's not that I don't have belief in him to make those shots. I think he was open enough; he will make it. I don't have doubt in that. But it's more about him getting to his actual game against the Celtics and their plethora of defenders. And it's like, there's no easy way to get to that. I think I would like to see him get some more of those like mid post touches that we saw him get earlier in the season. And that's kind of where I feel like he's in his office, right, so to speak, and a lot of guys on this team are. Jimmy and Bam are great in the mid post. Bam, high post, same thing. But Jaquez, I think like in some of those units, right, where maybe it's Jimmy's not on the floor and he can be a little bit more involved and everything doesn't have to be off ball for him as a scorer. I think that'll be a nice way to get him in rhythm as opposed to just having to hit open threes, which has never really been his role, right? So I think he has to make sure to find that balance, and I think that's what made Caleb's response in the playoffs so special. Not only because it was at such a high stage and such a high level, but he really just took what the defense gave him. There's me messing up another well-known saying, but yeah, like now it's up to Jaime. It's up to Jaime to show people that he can do it against the best defenses and that he can just respond to how they're playing him. He's going to have to take advantage of the open space, and if I think he can really have an impact as a cutter if they're going to be doing the way that they play Caleb.
Right after the break, we're going to talk about a player that it looks like these teams may compete with off the buyout market and what he would mean for each team. Before we do, want to mention a couple great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. We do this before Heat Celtics, but also before the Super Bowl. Make sure you get in on our Better Edge Super Bowl contest. It's $10 to participate. They got first, second, and third place prizes, and I'm going to give away some merchandise to a random entry. So go to betteredge.com, use code 5RSN or 5 Reasons, 5RSN or 5 Reasons. You choose, and you get $20 to play. And again, the contest is just $10. And of course, Prize Picks, use the code 5, FIVE. Get that Patrick Mahomes free square, half a passing yard. That's all you need. Play that one. You can play it up to $25. Pair it with Jimmy Butler if he's playing. Anybody that you want, you can pair it with Jason Tatum. We're not going to hold that against you. Go to prizepicks.com, use the code 5, FIVE, get that initial deposit matched up to $100. So as I was looking through some Celtics stories before we started here, there's a lot of talk about Gallinari going back there. And that's someone that they had. He was injured, obviously. And I'll just ask you this, because I know that we've talked about Gallinari as being an option for Miami. They've had an attraction to him for several years. They almost acquired him at the trade deadline when they got Iguodala, Crowder, and Solomon Hill in 2020. But there was a dispute over how many years. The Heat offered him 2. He wanted 1 or 3. They didn't end up acquiring him. He's not the same player that he was. He's played on a couple of bad teams lately in Detroit and Washington, but he's had some games. But I feel like he's going to be Miami's target. Like, I don't have a lot of information on this, but it just feels like it. It feels like that's one, and maybe a Thad Young or a DeLon Wright comes in after that. But if he's Boston's target too, does that make it more imperative that Miami gets him?
Well, look, man, Boston taking anybody that you're going after always hurts. There's no doubt about it. But honestly, I don't know, man. I think it would probably help them a little bit. I don't think like Gallinari is going to change the series for you. I think he's more of a depth piece at this point than like a consistent rotation player. No, I think he's still got some offensive juice left in him. Like he can still really shoot that ball, and he's kind of as he's aged, turned more into a stretch big. And it's funny, I think he would be just kind of like a Love replacement, or not replacement, but Love insurance, I would say, for when he's out. And more so than like, oh, he's a 4 that you add, right? I don't think he's a 4 anymore, right? Like he was once a 3, right? Early in his career or in his prime, he was a 3, then he was a 4. Now he's kind of a stretch 5. He really does not like move well out there, and I think you have to kind of keep him from having to defend in space. But he can really still shoot it. Can score and shoot over a mismatch, right? If they switch a small guy into him, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Heat just thought like this is a guy who can do a lot of the stuff that K Love is doing. Now I think K Love is just better. I think he moves better, and I think they would need to get Gallo on the Love diet plan, right? Because as of right now, I don't think Gallo can cover a lot of ground. I think he'd be used in a whole lot of zone and maybe a hedge and recover type of thing. But I'm not necessarily like determined if I'm the Heat to get Gallo. I wouldn't be like, oh man, do everything I can to get him. I don't feel like he's that type of piece. I think it would be cool if they got him another vet piece like that and somebody that they've been wanting to get forever. But all of these guys are more or less depth pieces. Same thing with Thad. He's obviously a different role play, different type of role player. I've been high the past couple of days on Chimezi Metu, who was playing for the Suns this season and played like 5 seasons for the Kings. And he's going to be 27 in March. Athletic type of 4-5 hybrid who's pretty mobile, and I think he can be that type of guy for them. You know, again, another type of depth piece. So I think might be able to play with or without Love, probably not next to Bam. And I think Metu has some stuff to him, man. He's lean, he moves well, really good roller. You know, I think he can hit open three. Sometimes is a little bit too quick trigger with it, and probably needs to, you know, just take the ones where he's wide open and his feet are set. But I like the stuff that he flashes, and you know, he's been a rotation player for a couple of years now. It's not like a guy who's just been sitting at the end of a bench and we haven't seen him, and it's all in theory. So I think a guy like that would make some sense too, instead of only having to add like, you know, 35-year-olds and 36-year-olds. Somebody like that is available. So young, athletic, and you know, somewhat proven in the sense that they've been in an NBA rotation for some years. So I like that idea too. DeLon Wright's still not available, so otherwise he would probably be number one for me as a guard defender for them. But you know, none of these guys are going to change your world, but I don't think they should be above trying to get a couple of these guys, which would mean they got to waive Drew Smith.
Well, right, and that would be the guy. I think the significance of this is more so for Boston than Miami, and here's why I say so. Boston is operating above the second apron, right? The whole idea was that if you operate above the second apron, you are significantly limited in terms of the way that you can add to your roster. There's a whole bunch of penalties, and the penalties are going to get worse, right? And I agree with the Heat on that. I don't think that they should operate above the second apron. I don't think that they should give up, exceptions and all the rest of this stuff and be bounced to bottom of the round and everything else that happens potentially with that. But I'll say this: if Boston continues to be able to add talent while operating over the second apron, it makes you rethink it a little bit. Because if they're able to outbid you for certain guys, I'm not talking about just with money, but just with the attractiveness of their program right now, then I don't know. Then maybe it's not so bad, honestly. And so, again, this is the team
They're
that you're
probably going to
trying to
get to it
catch.
soon.
Well, right. I think so, but I think that I think we have to watch how these teams operate in that space. There are 7 teams above the first apron. It could potentially limit Miami. There was some talk on our Discord today about Marcus Morris. They can't go after Marcus Morris. There's certain rules that are already in play on the first apron. Boston has decided to go to the second apron. That's not typically an organization that has spent crazy money. So I'm curious again to see if they're still able to add significant pieces. And again, we talk about, yes, Gallinari at this stage is a bench piece. But
But
look, that
they could
Boston
use them.
that's same. That Boston bench was atrocious last year in the playoffs. That was a huge advantage for Miami, right? Well, they've
And
been
they
able to add Drew and
they
Porzingis,
traded 4 for 2.
right? And now they're filling in gaps, and
Yeah.
that's the thing that we have to watch here, because then I think it becomes harder to argue you have to stay under it. Then it just
The good
becomes
news
more
for
of a
Miami
financial thing.
The good news for Miami regarding Gallinari is that there was a clip that went around. I think it was when he first got traded to the Wizards earlier this season, if I remember correctly, for like in the Porzingis trade. I think he said that he was going to circle the Boston game on the calendar, so that might I think Heat fans will like him a little bit after hearing that. And I don't know how much he wants to go back. I'm not saying he'll say no. I don't know. I can't speak for him, but um, I think maybe that helps. And what really helps is the Heat's ability to shell out that taxpayer mid-level, which is in the range of $4 or $5 million there. And, better than just getting a vet minimum for him, which would probably be somewhere around $3 million that other teams might be able to offer him. And the Heat can do that and stay under the second apron still, which is their ultimate goal financially. So again, and if you can waive Drew Smith again. Theoretically, I'm not sure that they're going to do this, and they might waive Drew Smith and then just promote Jamal Cain to get somebody else a two-way spot, and Jamal Cain gets the standard. But if they can waive Drew Smith, eat that that dead cap hit, because they would still need to pay him, and he would just be off the roster, and pay 2 guys and still be under the second apron. I think I'm not Brian Goins, shout out Brian, but the cap expert, but. Yeah,
Well, the other
I
thing you
think so.
mentioned is they could outbid with the using the mid level, but of course they're going to get a multiplier on that in terms of the actual dollars they need to spend. It keeps them under second apron. You're right, but it's still there's still a cost. There's a financial cost. That's not a vehicle cost. These are really two different things we're talking about that are intertwined. My overall point is this: if they don't get Gallinari, it's not the end of the world. I don't think they desperately need him. I'm looking at it more from Boston's perspective because the league has basically put this stuff in place essentially to create more parity and not allow teams to load up when they're already have a very high payroll, and to create some punitive stuff to prevent them from doing so. But if these teams can still get players anyway because they're just a more attractive situation and they can convince a guy to come, again, it makes you rethink it a little bit. So just something to look at. We'll have all the coverage for you of Celtics Heat. Also, obviously, check out the YouTube channel. We'll have some Super Bowl coverage as well. But we do a lot of Heat stuff there. So check it out. Thanks to our sponsors, Better Edge, Prize Picks, and also Tub Culture. ShopTubCulture.com. Make sure you use the code FIVE. And I promise my voice will be better someday. I don't know what day. Have a good one, everybody.